how's the turn up before you continue on with your work. Yeah, so today in the audience, we have a broad range of finance and investment professionals in the industry. So there are those who are CFA charter holders, CFA candidates, and those who may also be for the first time acquainted to CFA Society Malaysia. So I thought I'd just give a quick and short welcome remarks before I pass on to the other two speakers, our colleagues from CFA Institute. Yeah. Now, CFA Society Malaysia is the leading association of investment professionals in the Malaysian financial industry. So we are a local member and chapter of CFA Institute Global Network. Yeah. The society advocates initiatives that focuses on investment standards, financial education, and ethics in the capital market. Now, at the mention of CFA, I think most would have associated CFA to our flagship certification, which is the CFA program or the CFA exam. But what we do in the society and CFA Institute is more than just a certification. In the space of ESG, for example, CFA Institute recently issued the Global ESG Disclosure Standards for Investment Products, which is actually the first global voluntary standards for disclosing how an investment product considers ESG issues in its objective, investment strategies, and also stewardship activities. Now, as the focus on ESG investing becomes more mainstream, as you would know and would also read in the dailies and the papers, right? Many organizations are putting ESG as a key strategic focus to drive business moving forward. Now, there is then a high demand for professionals to be conversant in this space. Now, this morning, to those of you who have turned into Securities Commission Malaysia launch of its CG strategic priorities for the next 2 years, 2021 to 2023, you would have also noticed that the regulators are putting an utmost focus on ESG fitness, even at the board level. And this will actually be incorporated as part of SC's CG monitoring report, right? Today, we are very happy to work with our colleagues in CFA Institute to give you some quick perspective on the ESG landscape regionally and globally, and how the demand of ESG talent is on the rise, and then how the certificate on ESG investing aims to provide a solid foundation on ESG knowledge. Yeah. Now, without further ado, Evelyn, I'll pass back to you to introduce our colleagues from CFA Institute.
Thank you, Caroline. Now, I would like to invite Mary, the Head of Advocacy from CFA Institute Asia Pacific, to provide us some insight on the ESG trends and opportunities. Mary, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to start off by saying a big thank you to CFA Society Malaysia for having me here today, and congratulations in putting together such a timely and relevant event. Today, I'll quickly go through the global and regional trends in ESG and sustainable investing, and importantly, how these trends are driving some of the changes in the asset management industry, and what these changes may mean for aspiring professionals, as well as for managers who are looking to recruit talents and build teams. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to use the terms ESG investing and sustainable investing interchangeably. So I want to start my talk with a number. Next slide, please. So it's a rather big number. It's US dollar 130 trillion. And my question to all of you in the audience is, do you know what this number means? Okay. There can be many answers. Now, if you think you know what the answer is, or want to have a guess, please input it into the chat box. I'm not going to share the answer with you right away. I will do that at the end of my slides, but I can give you a hint, okay? The hint that I'm going to give you is it is a big number and it's not the size of my bonus, okay? So bear with me, it will all be reviewed in due course. So let's start with trends. Next slide, please. Without a doubt, what we're seeing is a massive structural shift into ESG and sustainable investing. And this is driven by 3 key factors. A, increased awareness by investors of the potential impact that ESG factors have on value. Some of these factors can be positive, it can be negative as well. So the positive would be for those companies that can harness ESG related opportunities, but it could be negative for those that fail to manage ESG-related risks. Now, the second driver is the greater availability of ESG disclosures by issuers, as well as ESG data and information from third-party providers that can help in investment decision making. Now, ESG information is still by no means perfect. There's some way to go, but we have come a long way as well. And lastly, intensifying regulatory scrutiny of greenwashing. By greenwashing, what we mean is investment products that make claims around being green or meeting ESG criteria or being sustainable more so than they really are. And one reason for the phenomenon of greenwashing is that there are many ESG-related terms, but there's actually no standardized definition or a pre-agreed way of using them. And the inconsistencies and differences may lead to misunderstandings or allegations of mis-selling, which will in turn give rise to mistrust. And this is something that regulators are very keen to address and to preempt. Now, next slide, please. According to the latest report published in the summer this year, the Global Sustainable Investment Review, or GSIR, estimated that the total amount of sustainable assets under management, AUM, reached $35 trillion globally at the end of 2020, an increase of 15% from 2018. And as you can see from previous reviews, the trend is a steady increase. And what's interesting is that in the past, Europe used to be the single largest region when it comes to sustainable AUM. So back in 2018, Europe accounted for $14.1 trillion in terms of AUM. But in this study, in the 2020 study, it has been overtaken by the US. And indeed, the US has generated quite a bit of the growth in the last 2 years. In this slide, Asia is mainly represented by Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, and it is quite small. But does it mean that ESG issues do not apply in Asia Pacific? Well, the answer is absolutely not. In fact, ESG issues are very important in this region. So let me give you an example. Let's say governance, right? Listed companies in the region tend to be controlled by a small number of individuals. They can be founders, families, stakes in governments, with relatively low institutional ownership. And therefore, getting governance right, getting the board composition right is extremely important for shareholder rights and investor protection. Let me give you another example, like environment. We all know that population, assets, urban areas in Asia Pacific are highly coastal, and they are at risk of climate change-induced extreme weather events. So the fact that sustainable AUM is not quite there yet in Asia doesn't mean that ESG issues are not relevant in Asia. And I need to apologize. I've just spotted a typo on the slide. It says US dollar billions. In fact, it should have said US dollar trillions. Okay, so next, please. So the $35 trillion is deployed into a number of different sustainable investment strategy. And this chart shows the AUM by sustainable investment strategy. The blue bar shows the latest figures, which is year-end 2020, and the orange bar shows the figures from the previous study from year-end 2018. And for the first time since GSIR maintained records, ESG integration became the most popular strategy among all the sustainable investment strategies, with an AUM of $25 trillion. In the past, negative or exclusionary screening was the most popular strategy, and you can see that this year it has dropped to about $15 trillion. Next slide, please. Now, for a long time, ESG investing has been confined to active strategies, but no longer. This chart shows the growth in AUM for ESG ETFs in the last decade or so. And you can see that the amount of AUM in sustainable ETFs and ETPs have exploded to about $324 billion US as at the end of September. And this is an over 10 times increase compared with the $28 billion at the end of 2018. And what we're seeing is two mega trends at play. The first one is the shift in sustainable investing, which we're talking about now. But the second is the ongoing popularity of passive investing. And net inflows for the 9 months this year is already 119 billion, which is already much higher than the entire AUM inflow for the entire 2020. And 2020 at 89 billion was already a record year. And in terms of products, passive products have dominated in terms of ETF, ESG ETF asset gathering, but we're also seeing the emergence of active products as well. So the outlook for ESG ETFs is actually quite promising. We're seeing more diversity in products and more active products. Next, please. So how has the last 2 years affected the shift to ESG and sustainable investing? If anything, the pandemic has reinforced it. ESG has had a pretty good crisis. During the second quarter of last year, when markets went into lockdown and asset prices ceased, ESG strategies demonstrated resilience. And indices of ESG companies actually outperformed the normal indices. The big inflows that we started seeing back in 2020 have continued into 2021. And many people are convinced that companies that demonstrate attentiveness to stakeholder relations, to governance issues, are better prepared to deal with the pandemic and its implications, as well as other challenges that arise from ESG issues. Next, please. Now, CFA Institute from time to time has surveyed our membership and our investors and practitioners on their attitudes to ESG. And this is the last one we did. We asked what the motivation is behind integrating ESG factors into investment processes. And globally, the top 2 most selected answers were to manage risk and client demand. So I want to show you a slide about the risk landscape. Next, please. The World Economic Forum publishes a global risk report each year. And here on this slide, we show the top 5 risks in terms of the biggest potential impact. And you can see how that's changed and evolved in the last decade or so. So you can see, and on this slide, blue boxes are economic risks, green boxes are environmental risks, and red social risks. And you can see how the risk landscape has evolved from a focus on economic risks about 10 years ago, which is understandable, by the way, because we were coming out of the global financial crisis, to environmental and social risks in recent years, as you know, we are beset with extreme weather events, water risk, food security, and other natural disasters. In this year, unsurprisingly, infectious disease is right at the top of the chart. And that's because the virus highlights how interconnected our lives and economic systems are, and how climate change can potentially turn up the probability of pandemics. In the same survey next slide, please. In the same survey, we also asked why practitioners are not taking any ESG issues into consideration. So what are their barriers to ESG integration? And the top 2 most selected answers, again, for not doing ESG integration, were lack of demand and insufficient knowledge. And the point about insufficient knowledge is actually most relevant in APAC and in EMEA. And this is something that the team at the CFA Institute and with our societies has placed a lot of focus on. And that's why we're here today. We would like to be your partner in this journey and help equip the industry with knowledge and skill sets to best position themselves with this change. Now, one of the challenges to ESG integration that we have had over and over again is the rise of alternative data. And so the next slide shows how the question of issuer disclosures and company reporting is being handled, because while it's constantly evolving, investment managers have to make do with what they have and have to start, when they start integrating ESG issues into their decision making, they need to find other use of other data sources to help them with their process. So what emerged during our research is that a number of managers are increasingly using alternative data. And this chart shows the polling data we collected during some of the discussions in our research last year. And again, I'll focus on the top 2 most selected statements. And the topmost selected statement is that the rise of alternative data will make sustainability analysis more robust. And the second most selected answer is that sustainability is an area where human judgment and active management will thrive. And what this means is that what we have in front of us is actually some very interesting opportunities. Sustainability data is often contextual and subjective, and technology will be playing a key role in collecting alternative data. But that data, once collected, needs to be cleaned, structured, filtered, and turned into something that is decision useful. So we need the human judgment to contextualize the data, to interpret it, to determine materiality. And the ability to harness this data into the investment process is key. And so by combining alternative data, which is real-time and static, and backward-looking data from issuers and rating agencies, practitioners can build a more complete picture to make their analysis more robust. And so when we were talking to our membership, some of their examples of alternative data they're using include, for example, public sentiment, geospatial data, sea levels, and thermal mapping. Next, please. Now, data must be converted into decision useful information, and for that, we need people with sustainability expertise. So as part of our research, we worked with LinkedIn to review about 1 million LinkedIn profiles. And you can see on this table some the outcome of that research. So what does this table show? Let's look at the top row, which says portfolio manager. So in that research, we looked at 146,000 profiles on LinkedIn that says they're portfolio managers. Of these 146,000 profiles, 1.5% had sustainability or ESG related skills. And that's already a 32% growth from the previous year. But at the same time, when we were looking at job postings for portfolio managers, 18% of them actually wanted or flagged that ESG or sustainability skills was a desirable feature when hiring. So in a nutshell, even though a lot of job postings and in portfolio managers, almost 1 in 5 posts wanted sustainability skills, only a fraction of the profiles of portfolio managers actually have those skills. So there's quite a bit of gap between the supply and demand of ESG expertise, with supply lagging way behind. And this is in line with the feedback that we're getting from the industry. Now, lastly, remember the 130 trillion? I've seen that there are some very some answers, including AUM or the amount of capital that needs to go net zero. I think you guys are on the right track. So basically, 130 trillion is the amount of capital committed by the Glasgow Financial Alliance for net zero, GFA, and that's led by Mark Carney, who's the former governor of the Bank of England, and it was announced during COP26. And it's a huge number, and it would be great if they can deliver it. Now, and so I wanted to end on COP26, which is something that I think has captured a lot of the attention of media and industry in the beginning weeks of November. And if I were to sum it up, I think I would use this image, which is a glass that can be viewed as half full or half empty, depending on your perspective. There were many promises in terms of methane, in terms of carbon justice, the creation of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Board, is also very encouraging. But there's also lingering doubts that we have not gone far enough. For example, are we facing out coal or are we facing down coal, right? But whichever way you look at it, globally, carbon transition is underway, and private finance has a big role to play. And not only will this turn up opportunities for all of us, I think the way I would look at it is that all of us will get to participate in something that's purposeful and meaningful. So I hope CFA Institute will be your partner in this journey. In the back of my slides, I have resources that are available for people who would like to find out more about some of the research that we've done and some of the previous events that we've provided. So with that, I will hand back over to Evelyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for that insightful and fruitful sharing on the underlying opportunities and challenges about ESG. Next, I would like to welcome Richard, the Senior Director of Institutional Partnership from CFA Institute Asia Pacific, to share about the CFA Institute Certificate in ESG Investing. Richard, are you ready?
Great, yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, for having me here today. And thank you for your interest. Thanks too to Mary. And I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to go quite quickly through some quite detailed information so that we make sure we leave time for Alan, who is an interesting person who's taken the certificate, and I will sort of give you some firsthand insight. So if I can ask for the next slide, thanks so much. Now I'm going to come back to Mary's slide about that almost 10 times gap between supply of sustainability-related competencies and the demand for them. I think that it doesn't matter which data you look at, there's very clearly a strong interest in sustainability, and it is a growing interest in sustainability. And that kind of filters down throughout the ecosystem. So it's both the availability of capital, both active and passive, but also demand for skills and expertise. And in fact, if talking to a colleague in Europe was saying, ESG in Europe used to be a nice to have, and now it's just a must have. So we're in a slightly different position in APAC, but you know, we're certainly part of the same river. Moving to the next slide, I'm going to just talk briefly about who the certificate was designed for and also who's using it. So the initial cohorts of people in the certificate were portfolio managers and analysts, and I think that reflected two things. One, people wanting to credential skills that they already had, or people who realized they needed to acquire skills for those two critical roles. What we are increasingly seeing now is a flow of people into the certificate in both the wealth management and the sales and relationship space. It's critical for people in those parts of the ecosystem to be able to speak the language and to kind of meet clients and bridge clients and portfolio managers and fund products. Similarly, we're also seeing increasing numbers of people on the strategic side of businesses, product development teams and executives, as well as in the trustee and the non-executive director space. So for example, there's a very strong interest in programs that focus on non-executive director training in sustainability. And in fact, our certificate is in use in that space as well. Next slide, please. Great. So I'm just going to take you on a very, very high-level tour through what the certificate is. So first and foremost, it was developed by practitioners for practitioners. Now, it is a self-paced program, and what that means is that after you register, you have a year to complete the program. It takes somewhere between 100 and 130 hours of study. I want to flag that makes it's quite a significant program. You know, if you compare it, say, to PRI certificates, which are 3 and 6 hours each, so for a total of 12 hours, our focus is making sure that people have a really broad foundational understanding of sustainability insofar as ESG is concerned, and are able to locate new knowledge in that foundation. So as new regulations get released, as things change in sort of in the market space or in client demand, people with a very broad foundation of knowledge and understanding are able to kind of make sense of that and locate it relative to other things. The credential is obviously examined. It's a 2-hour and 20-minute exam. The cost, which I think people will be interested in, is $675 US. I think that you know, we've done some homework on how that stacks up relative to other programs that are available without getting into sort of quality or substance. It is a hugely competitive price, and I would urge people to have a look to sort of substantiate that for themselves. Next slide, please. Now, we're speaking to people here as individuals, but we also have a structure which supports businesses that want to make a statement or are trying to encourage staff to upskill, or who are sort of shifting their businesses in the direction of sustainability. So we do now have institutional invoicing using voucher systems. We offer some tracking data to businesses in terms of people who've enrolled, when they've enrolled, when vouchers have been used, how people performed on exams, assuming that individuals give us permission to share that last piece of data. We also provide support in terms of media kits to businesses so that they can message their client base broadly about their intention and focus on sustainability and building skills within their workforce. And then on an individual level, LinkedIn badges for people to put into their LinkedIn profiles. And again, going back to the slide that Mary touched on, which looked at that gap between supply and demand of skills, I think there are career advantages to that. Next slide, please. Now, we thought we'd have a look at Malaysia quickly relative to other markets. Now, just to be clear, this is the global total. So there are over 12,500 registered candidates in the program. There are 4,500 candidates who've completed and earned the credential. And in Malaysia, those numbers are 34 registered candidates with 8 people who've completed the credential. And we'll be talking to one of those people later today. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. If you just keep pushing the slide buttons and it'll feed, thank you so much. So I think there are questions on people's minds about credibility. What is quite interesting to us, so these are examples of firms, and I think there's some really well-known names here, examples of firms who support their employees in taking the certificate and who have given us permission to share that information. So again, you can see how popular the certificate is at an institutional level, and I think that kind of ties in with both the competency and skills demand as well as business pressure on needing to offer and support sustainable offerings to one's clients. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through very quickly what the certificate covers because I think that's a key question. I did notice the question about how often the exam is available, and I'll come to that. But just to talk very quickly about the substance of what's in it. So you can see here that there's obviously an introduction to ESG. Mary talked about different methodologies for ESG. So, you know, the fact that best in class is now the most popular. ESG integration is now the most popular methodology employed by firms in terms of AUM that it covers. So that's covered right up in the beginning in the introduction and again in greater depth later on. Then we look at the ESG market. What does that look like? And then, of course, as you'd expect, the E, S, and G, environmental, social, and governance factors. And then also engagement and stewardship. Now, that is a really critical part of sustainability for passive managers. So, for example, they have very significant asset bases, which is one of the things that Mary talked about. Their focus on making sure that there's this kind of positive change really happens through engagement and stewardship. But that is not limited to passive managers only. Next slide, please. Now this slide really kind of are the final sort of sections of the program, but they also cover what I think is the bulk in terms of challenge and demand, and I'll talk a bit about how that shows up in the examination. So we look at ESG analysis, valuation, and integration, which of course is critical, and as Mary pointed out, integration is the most popular methodology, so it's vital that that is covered in detail. We also look at ESG portfolio construction and management, as well as at investment mandates, portfolio analytics, and client reporting. Next slide, please. Now, how this shows up in the examination, and we just try to break that down because I think people kind of ask those questions. You can see that there is a bias within the program towards those latter sections. So ESG analysis, portfolio construction and management, and the questions around mandates. So I think this goes to the question of, what required prior learning is there for this program? And so there is no required learning, but it is using, say, the UK National Qualification Framework. It is a level 4 program. So that means it is a an undergraduate level program in terms of their National Qualifications Framework. And the key issue is how people kind of prepare themselves for this examination. You can see that I think it's reasonable to say that some familiarity within the investment management industry and finance generally will be of benefit because of the weighting of those questions in those final chapters. Next slide, please. Now, here are some sort of high-level details. Okay, we've covered some of them, but the critical question that I want to focus on here, or issue that I want to focus here, is the examination options in the top right screen. So exams are offered both through Prometric test centers and through online proctoring. If we have time, we'll go through some details towards the end of the presentation around that. But I thought it was really important in the context of the pandemic to say that it is possible to take this examination at home. There are systems checks that people would need to go through in order to use the online proctoring, and also that the time zones for online proctoring, or the times for us in APAC, can be quite early in the morning, so sort of 6 a.m. start times. And I thought that that would be helpful just to flag for people. Next slide, please. Right, now, I touched on the systems check for the online proctoring. A couple of messages that we have speaking to a lot of clients is that it is typically better to take this on a personal computer at home rather than a workplace computer if people have access to that, because often the firewalls that are in place and security structures that are in place for work-based laptops can present a challenge for the online proctoring. Those challenges are not insurmountable. I just want to say to people, please make sure that you have sufficient time for that pre-testing. And if you look at the sort of detailed information, really we're saying sort of 20 minutes beforehand. We'd really like to suggest that people make clear a half hour for that testing and getting ready for the online proctoring. On the left-hand side, you have the Prometric test centers, and CFA Society Malaysia team have actually put some quite detailed information in about those test centers, which we will get to shortly. Thank you. Next slide. Right, now the test centers, computer-based test centers, this gives you sort of a bird's eye view of what they look like. You can see that they are relatively small in terms of capacity, but they offer effective accommodation for people taking the exams. The implication of this is that if there is a sudden rush on the certificate, that you need to be able to find an available booking at one of the test centers. And so we're really advising people to try and to book examination dates relatively far out and to explore those dates within a broad window. So thank you. Next slide. That'll just give you a quick visual of what the test centers look like. You can see that they are very professional and easy to use. Thank you so much for putting those in, CFA Society colleagues. Next slide, please. And the following slides really go through in detail how you would register for the program and schedule an exam. So the first step in this process is that you'd need to set up a CFA Institute account if you don't have one already, and then you move to the certificate in ESG Investing tile, and you essentially follow the steps. And the slide that follows will kind of go into that into some detail. So next slide, please. All right, so if you want to go down the test center route, depending on where you're dialing into this webinar from, you want to check the test center that is closest to you physically. You do that by putting your city address into that search engine, and that will tell you which test centers are available to you. I like the fact that we've got the recommendation here. Please do select a relatively wide date range, okay, just so that you can identify which test center is available to you and then start narrowing down those options. Next slide, please. Thank you for the answer to John's question. Yes. Right, similar process with online proctoring. So please just remember that online proctoring may feel very virtual to you as the test taker, but there's a real person on the other side. And so similarly, one needs to make sure that you book a specific time and slot. Again, please use relatively wide date ranges, and please try and book these slots well in advance. Next slide, please. All right, now, when you register for the program, the candidate resources that you will receive are the curriculum ebook and a PDF version. Okay, so there isn't a hard copy manual. But if you want a hard copy manual, there are two possible routes to that. The one is that you can purchase one on Amazon. It is relatively expensive. It's $135. Alternatively, for people who want to work off hard copies and make notes on them, one can use the PDF and print a copy for yourself. Next slide, please. The QR code here will give you sort of a summary of all the information. It will also take you to the CFA Institute pages where there are quite detailed Q&A slides, for example. A couple of things that I think I'll mention here. We've talked about the registration cost for the program is $675. The rescheduling time, if you want to change your exam scheduling, is $30. That rescheduling has to happen 72 hours in advance of your exam time, so it's not going to save you from missing your alarm clock in the morning. And there is also a retake option for candidates who have not been successful at their first exam sitting, and that is $475. So next slide, please. Before we hand over to Alan, just a question that I think that is on many people's minds is thinking back to the probability of passing the examination. So we do have global data for that. The 78% of people who take the exam pass currently. And I thought that is worth mentioning because that's quite a different pass percentage, say, to the CFA program in recent times. So thank you so much for offering me this time. I realize we've gone through this at high speed, but we really are here as a supportive partner for you. If you want to think about how your career can contribute to the movement towards sustainability that is sweeping across the world. I'm now going to hand over to Alan. So thank you so much for having me. Alan has successfully completed the certificate, and I think it would be absolutely great to hear from him what his experience is and how that has shown up in his working life. So thank you so much for having me. Over to the next slide and over to Alan.
Thank you, Richard, for your informative sharing about the certificate. So moving on to the next part of today's session, I would like to invite Caroline again and Mr. Alan Lim. So as the first in Malaysia who has successfully passed the certificate, Alan, the head of equity research from M Investment Bank, has more than 12 years of experience as an equity analyst, providing his professional analysis in various sectors, including healthcare, plantation, telecommunication, and more. So I'll pass the stage to Caroline and Alan.
Thanks, Evelyn. Helen, good to see you. Thanks for spending your time here. Just a quick note to all on the call. So we are running through quite fast. I understand that it takes some time to digest the information. But after the session today, we are posting this the recorded session of today to our YouTube channel, and we will also send to you a copy of the slides that we're running through so that you can go through it again at your own personal time. Right? Now, Alan, so you're there. Alan, we can see you. Maybe
hi,
just
Caroline.
a quick hi, thanks. Maybe just a quick introduction of yourself to all of those on the call here today. We see that you're a charter holder. Maybe you can share with us a bit more what you are doing currently.
Oh, okay. Hi, yes. So currently I'm working as a head of equity research in M Investment Bank. So my day-to-day task is because I myself cover healthcare and also glove sector. And besides that, I also oversee other sectors. Basically all the key sectors such as banking, plantation, and also telco. So my day-to-day task is to look at the reports and make sure all the key things are there. And we publish our reports on a daily basis to recommend to our clients which stocks are good to invest and which stock are to avoid. And most importantly, ESG consideration is embedded in each and every stock that we cover currently.
I see. And maybe just to go back a bit broader, right? You're an equity research, so maybe you can share us a bit about your views. How do you see the sustainability, the importance of sustainability in our industry in Malaysia specifically?
I think it is very relevant. It is very relevant in the current situation. For example, yesterday, Corp just issued a statement that they will put a lot of emphasis on how to integrate ESG into their investment decision. And about 2 weeks ago, EPF, which is the biggest fund in Malaysia, have also stated that they will go through sector. They will embed ESG by sector into their valuation. So, and this should be completed by year end. So we can see that more and more asset managers are placing ESG into their consideration in Malaysia.
Yeah. Now, you did mention how imperative or how important to have the knowledge on the ESG and a solid foundation as part of your role, right? So maybe you can share with us what made you choose and enroll for the CFA Institute Certificate in ESG Investing.
Yeah, I think let me start by saying this. Now I have around 12 years experience, and in my first 10 years of my working experience as financial analyst, getting myself to be a CFA charter has been the best career decision in my life. Now that I'm in the second decade of my working experience, I believe that taking CFA Institute Certificate in ESG Investing will be the best career decision for the second decade of my career. This is because I found more meaning and purpose in my work, because I can contribute in a way by embedding a discount or premium to the stock valuation. And this, as we all know, if we want something to happen in the current situation, so it has to be top down. So head of governments, the CEOs of the public listed companies, if it comes from the top, then things are easier to be implemented. So this CFA Institute Certificate in ESG Investing, by learning the curriculum, we will be able to communicate the need in terms of why there's a need, and put a figure into the need. Because if we don't speak in the language of the business and also CEO, then it's very hard to convey the message of how important ESG is. And maybe I also want to share a story on why I enrolled into this. So not too long ago in July, COVID cases were still very serious in Malaysia, and I was working from home back then. As I have extra 2 hours per day due to the time saved from traveling, I was looking around on what to learn to improve myself. As ESG has become mainstream, it has gained a lot of attention in the media and also in the investment field. So I decided to Google the word ESG and to find out more about ESG. And guess what? One of the first few results generated from the Google search is a CFA Institute Certificate in ESG Investing. So at that time, I was like, wow, this must be something very prominent, and that's how I started to search more for more information on this. And to get back at the numbers that Richard shared just now, so currently only 8 people from Malaysia passed this. So now it makes sense, because at that time, about 3 or 4 months ago, I asked around and nobody could give me a guidance on how the exam is like, how to go for it, whether it's online or have to go to a center. So basically, among my peers and friends, nobody can answer me. Until one day, I saw a LinkedIn post from someone who has passed the examination. So she's a Malaysian, but now working in UK. So I I become a LinkedIn connection. So we become a LinkedIn connection, and then I try to understand more on this from her, and that's how I get to know more. And after understanding more about this, then I decided to give it a try.
Great, Alan. Sounds like you did a bit of searching there before you came across and chanced this certificate, right? Alan, I mean, as part of your job, so after you have completed the certificate, how applicable do you find the curriculum and the syllabus that Richard has run through just now as part of your job? How were you able to apply what you have learned from and take up from the certificate?
Yes, it is very relevant. I think gone are the days where investment is just about low PE, high dividend yield, and high earnings growth. Some of the new vocabulary for the new investment field now, I think, is we have to know terms such as negative screening, positive screening, and impact investing, because these are the considerations made by the major asset managers from at least from US and also Europe. So we can find a low PE, high dividend yield, and high earnings growth stock which fulfill all these three criteria. But if they fail in ESG, there's a possibility that the stock that is invested in didn't really perform in the long run. If we think from a global perspective, this is possible because in the current global investments, we need to the investability of a stock has to reach as much asset managers as possible. And if they fail the ESG criteria from the US and European side of ESG standards, then it's very hard for the stock to perform in the long run, even though it's a low PE, high dividend yield, and high earnings growth stock.
Great. Maybe we come to just the last part of your sharing. I want to also hear from you personally to the audience here, right? You've taken the exam. You said that you've completed, I think, a few months ago. So I think sometime in August, right? When you took and you finished it. Okay. How did you take the exam in a test center, or did you do it in your home, the online proctored option?
Yes, I took the exam online. The exam, I choose the time was at 2 a.m. because I had to accommodate UK time. By the way, when I took the exam, it has not been, it's under UK CFA Society because it has not shifted 100% to CFA Institute. But anyway, I think the curriculum are still very much alike. So why 2 a.m.? So besides the UK time consideration is also to make sure my daughter sleeps well and did not disturb the exam process. So don't think that the online exam is a very chill kind of situation. It's actually quite stressed because I need to clear my room, and on the 4 walls it has to be clear. There's no notes, no paper, and so if besides that, if you have another computer monitor, then it has to be removed from the room. So it's very strict. And what I did is 1 hour before the test, I have to clear my working space. And secondly, I think 3 days and also 1 week before that, you need to make sure your internet connection is fast enough, because throughout the 2 hours and 20 minutes exam, the camera has to be on, and the experience is a little bit weird because you know that someone is watching you, but you don't know who is that. But you need to turn on your camera and you know someone is watching you, and you still need to keep your brain awake, stay awake and try to go through all the questions. So I have some, if you choose to do it online, I think I can share some little tips, but it may or may not applicable to you because I did it at 2 a.m. So I took coffee about 30 minutes before that. So if coffee works for you, then yeah, that would be good. This is not cheating, by the way, because it was not mentioned that we cannot take coffee before the exam. And so I think I spent in total about 90 to 100 hours. Overall, the experience was good and it's challenging, but I think it's a realistic target to pass if someone is serious and have the motivation to study the materials.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Alan, to sharing with us your personal journey and also your tips there in terms of taking coffee at 1:30 a.m. before you take the exam from 2 to 5 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
Oh, I have another tips to share. So if you are very serious on this, I would recommend that you really buy this book. Basically to buy the physical book, because what I did is that the camera didn't really work. But anyway, so buy the physical book, and what I did was I stand and read the book, so I can keep myself alert and study longer. And another thing is the learning outcome statement. So for those who have taken CFA exams, we know that LOS stands for learning outcome statement. So in the beginning of each chapter and also the pages before the topic started, there will be a key things on what to study for. So if you are reading the contents, and so what I did was I read the contents and then I go back to the LS, and I did this repeatedly. So for those contents that is not so didn't really answer the LS, I think you can put less attention to it. But if it answers the LS, the learning outcome statement, then you should put more attention on it.
Okay. Thanks, Alan, for the study tips. That's definitely helpful. We have come to the end of the session, but we have a few more minutes. Alan, thank you. Maybe just also leave the session the next few minutes for live Q&A. There are some questions which we received from the audience when they registered. And if there are also some other questions on the live chat, Evelyn, maybe you want to go through those that haven't been answered?
Mary and Richard have been really, really helpful. They have been helping us to answer the question offline. So most of the questions have been answered, but we do have received a number of questions from the registration. So these are the questions that we have gathered. So I think Richard has already addressed the first question regarding the availability of online classes for this certificate. So there is online classes available from a number of prep providers. Maybe you can check Richard's answers in the chat box. So, but for the second and third questions, that it's where we need Mary expertise to answer the questions. So Mary, so how can fixed income investors help to push the ESG data disclosure, especially for private issuance? Do you want to answer this question?
Hi, thank you for the question. I think that's a very important question because it speaks to the whole idea about engagement and stewardship, and whether you are a fixed income or equity investor, it's good to be engaging with your portfolio companies and help them think about ESG issues. In terms of data disclosures for fixed income issuers, I think it's incumbent upon the investor to articulate the sorts of disclosures that they would like to see and explain to the issuer why those disclosures are important. So this is a very important conversation to be having. I think whether or not it's a private issuance, the key is that there are quite a few resources out there that will give investors the assurance that the bond issue or the securities that they're buying into are in line with what's generally considered green or sustainable. So there's the Climate Bonds Initiative. ICMA has some green bond principles. So motivating and encouraging issuers to issue green bonds or sustainability-linked bonds or sustainable bonds could be a factor that will, help investors in distinguish between the different issues and also allow them to have access to improved disclosures. Because typically some of these issues will come with second-party opinion or third-party verification, and there will also be some sort of commitment by the issuer in terms of the ongoing reporting about use of proceeds and updates on projects and other sustainability-linked targets. So it's an absolutely, I think this is a very important question, very important to have to be engaging with companies, and very important to take advantage of some of the resources, rules, and market standards that are out there.
Thank you, Mary. We still have another 2 more minutes to the end of the session, so maybe we can answer the last question that we have received. So how can one choose which organization or company to invest in? So
I think that's a very, very important question. After all, that's why our membership is here, is to basically pick the winners. And I think the answer to that question depends a lot on what your objective is. I think traditionally investors are looking for risk and return, or risk, to maximize risk-adjusted return. I think nowadays some investors are increasingly looking at return, risks, and also carbon, right? The carbon footprint. So again, if you're looking at ESG integration to protect your portfolio, to make sure that you don't inadvertently invest into something that's exposed, that would expose you, the portfolio to greater risk, then I think you can, I think absolutely apply fundamental value analysis, but make sure that you have considered all the potential risk factors. But I think increasingly there are lots of investors who are looking beyond the traditional risk-adjusted return parameters. They're thinking about the potential that may be brought about by decarbonization strategies, or the transition into a low carbon world, and whether some of these companies may or may not have a role to play in some of these opportunities. But I think, to take a step back, I think it's important to remember that fundamental value analysis is something that's core to everything that we do. Sometimes ESG considerations will impact upon our decision, but sometimes they may not. If you're looking at, if value, for some investors, valuation will continue to be important. And even if, a company scores very highly on ESG, it doesn't mean that it is providing a lot of value. Maybe it's because it's already been bid up, and therefore the price is expensive relative to other opportunities, and therefore an investor may choose to pass on that opportunity. Conversely, a company's share price may be suffering because it's had a few incidents happen to it. But if it has shown determination to improve, then maybe the market's not valuing that accordingly, and if as an investor you're comfortable that those ESG issues are being addressed, then it may be an opportunity for you. So I think there's no black and white way of looking at it. As we all know, investing is an art rather than a science. So again, when we talk about ESG and sustainable investing, I think we need to be careful in what we mean, and also what the purpose it is what the objectives are that we're trying to fulfill.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So with this, we have come to the end of today's session. We'll gather all the questions as well as the answers, and we'll send it along with the deck to all the participants today. So we hope you have a more in-depth understanding on the certificate, and we wish everyone who would like to embark on this journey the very best of success. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you for taking your time off to be with us today, and stay safe and see you soon.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank
Everybody.
you.
Bye.
Thanks.